This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, Whose Lives Matter? We are joined with two very special guests, Tommy Sotomayor, a radio talk show host, and Joe Hicks, a political commentator and analyst. Tommy and Joe, welcome to the Glazov Gang.
Thanks for having me.
With you, Jamie.
Thank you. Let's just begin with Black Lives Matter. We've got so much happening, these tragic criminal assassinations of our police officers, Obama's speech, the Black Lives Matter movement inciting these killings. Joe, you were on Megyn Kelly the other evening, and you were pointing out, let's start with this, that when blacks are killing blacks and innocents are dying between those shootings or whatnot, whatever's happening, there are no Black Lives Matter marches. Let's begin with this.
Well, yeah, I think what we're seeing is that Black Lives Matter only when a white cop or a police officer who may not be white, but at least a police officer kills a young black youth, then that life matters because it has a political context that can be exploited. When, as I mentioned on that particular show, right here in San Bernardino, we had these two adults and a 9-year-old kid coming out of a liquor store, and all three of them were shot down by another black man who is now in custody. Black Lives Matter said nothing about that. So for me, it raises this issue, and I've been watching this for a long time, Jamie. This isn't, something I just observed. I've observed this just as I've observed the kind of growth, if you will, going back to Trayvon Martin, of the Black Lives Matter movement. So it very much is an issue for me about this issue of Black Lives mattering, but only in a political context, can be exploited by the people that seem to be joining forces around that particular political notion.
And thank you, Joe. And the people exploiting this are usually overlooking something that Tommy brought up in one of his recent videos. And Tommy says, 13% of the population is committing 52% of the murders. Am I correct, Tommy?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead with that and how you would put it into context of what we're talking about.
Well, see, I have to deal with it in a personal context because being a black man in America, you run the risk of seeing blacks like Trayvon Martin. Again, this was not Trayvon Martin, but Tyshawn Lee. Tyshawn Lee was a Chicago youth, 9 years old, who was lured into an alley and shot 7 times center mass, execution style. And there was no Black Lives Matter march. If there was ever a Black Lives Matter march, it should have been there. You have these blacks. I did another story. 3 black men sitting in their car listening to the radio, shot down. No leads on these shootings and no marches. I think it's kind of sad when you have a bunch of people who are committing the most atrocities that are happening to them today against themselves. And no one, and I mean no one, is out standing up and saying this has to stop. You have to remember, when mothers had their children dying due to drunk drivers, what did they create? MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. But you do not see these black mothers of these youth who are losing their lives every day in the street to each other, standing up and creating the same type of anti-violent rhetoric that you should hear. But when it's a cop, everybody's there.
Well, thank you, Tommy. And look, this is directly connected here to, we often have the left pointing the finger, racist, 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 and they love using this word. But, when you don't care about certain lives being lost, maybe there's a chance that you might be racist when you're calling other people racist. And Joe, the other day, and also, one of your main arguments is it's time to crystallize who the real racists are. And what do you mean by that?
Well, there are people that have been obsessed about the issue of race. I mean, there was a long battle fought. I've been at this game, if you want to call it a game, for a long time. I started out as a black nationalist, became a Marxist. Over the span of time, my politics changed into finding my home in politics in terms of conservatism. And we fought a long battle. I ran the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the organization founded by Dr. King, right here in Los Angeles. So the civil rights battle was fought about making sure all Black Americans, had equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome, but had equality of opportunity. And if we think back just within my lifetime, I'm probably maybe the youngest one on this panel here today. I can remember the times when Black people, could not, if they traveled back down south to visit relatives, they could not stay at certain hotels or motels. They couldn't eat at various places. We know the whole water fountain thing. We know all that, the housing discrimination, there's certain jobs that Black people didn't even think about trying to apply for. You weren't going to get hired. So the battle was fought. Couldn't vote. In relatively short period of time, 1964, 1965, Blacks got the right to vote, and the Civil Rights Act was passed. So we fought the battle, and I think slowly but surely, a lot of white Americans gave up this notion of white supremacy. Now we have to ask, well, who are the people that are most obsessed about race? My friend Larry Elder often makes a statement that Black people are more racist than white people, because they seem to be the ones that are constantly making an issue about race at all kinds of levels. And we've now created what I call the grievance industry, where people like Jesse Jackson, though luckily he's kind of off the stage now, but we've had people that have made virtual healthy incomes off of pimping that kind of notion about racism. Never goes away. It's always going to be there. And what would Jesse Jackson and other people do if it wasn't for these kind of organizations?
Tommy, your thoughts on that?
That's 100% correct. You have to understand, if these people make their income from this thing, then they're not going to want to get rid of it. It's just like Big Pharma. If Big Pharma is making its money off of you being sick and it maintaining your sickness but not curing it, then it's not going to come up with cures. You have to forgive me. My friend Bambi will join us every now and again. But yes, you look at people like Jesse Jackson. They've made a healthy living. Al Sharpton. These people are the political ambulance chasers. They are telling Black people to remain in a perpetual state of victimhood because they're getting paid off of that victimhood. And you cannot expect them to want a cure for this thing called racism. I, as a Black man, have been lately, I've had all kinds of names levied at me. And let me tell you some of them. I've been called crispy, black, smoke, coon, any kind of name you can think of. And guess who hasn't called me these names? Whites. Guess who call me them every day? Blacks. And yet Blacks want to say that other people are being racist against them when honestly, and Larry Elder and I are close as well, do you look at the people who are really being racist? It's us. It's us saying things like when Tommy Lauren goes national and people don't like what she's saying, they say she should be murdered. How far do you think that would have went if a Black person had done that? A Black female had said something that whites didn't like, and in droves they said that Black female should be murdered. What cries would have been levied on those whites?
Thank you, Tommy. And look, let's get to the core of some of these issues that you gentlemen talk about, and many talk about, many brave people talk about, and you bring up Larry Elder. And look, this was years back. I'm sure it's happened many times, but I was watching one talk show, and he's up on the stage, and there was a Black lady that was given the microphone. She's in the audience, and she's yelling. She's upset. Her son is in jail, and the police are this and that, and the school didn't do this or something. And then Larry just stops her and says, "May I ask you a question? Where is the father?" And I remember that in the audience there was just this, "Oh, how could he ask this?" And "Oh, he's such a bad person." And this is a fascinating phenomenon, that Larry is hated for asking this question, and yet this subject is at the core of many of these issues. Joe?
Well, these are things that activists, refuse to talk about. They won't talk about the rate of murder in this country. They won't talk about Black on Black crime. If you raise that, they object immediately. They say, "Oh, you're blaming the victim," and they will use a dozen other kind of excuses to try to deflect away from those kinds of discussions. They will not discuss the pathology, actually, that is gripping cities like Chicago, where the murder rate is probably more than Baghdad at this point. So these are kind of the dirty laundry that they've relegated to being non-issues, because they want to focus, as Tommy just indicated, they always want to focus on white people, what white people supposedly doing. They never want to look inward. They never want to be introspective about the kinds of things that are the wounds that are self-inflicted inside of communities. You know, once we passed the Civil Rights Movement, and we passed the Voting Rights Act, and laws against discrimination in housing, and on and on and on, and society said, okay, now obviously you don't eradicate racism, overnight. There's no silver bullet that makes that happen. And I always laugh when people say, "Oh, Hicks, you're saying there's no racism in the country." Well, no, I'm not saying that, because I can't find a single society on the face of the earth where somebody's not hating somebody else because of their religion, the color of their skin, any host of reasons. We only have to look back as far as the butchery that went on in Rwanda among people who virtually could not tell the difference physically among them, but they could certainly find little things that they were butchering themselves over. So yes, there's racism, but my point is, today, Black people can't honestly say that's the major impediment to keep them from attaining success in this nation. And if you're letting white people keep you from doing things, and everybody else says, wait a minute, you've achieved that equality of opportunity, all you got to do is take that opportunity to do whatever you want to do with your life.
And Joe, and maybe one of the issues is that there is not a father in the home in many realms of the inner cities, of the Black community, etc. And Joe, this speaks very close to, and Tommy, this speaks very close to a lot of what you've been saying in your videos lately in terms of fatherlessness.
Yes, and then people know I have a documentary coming out called A Fatherless America, and that is the major theme of it. When you look at these inner cities, most of the crime are in the inner cities. What else do you see a large number of? Fatherless homes. When no one will correlate those, when Obama will not come out and correlate those. As a matter of fact, Barack Obama came out in front of the American public on Father's Day and said Black fathers need to take care of their kids, when that's a misnomer that's thrown out there. But number two, he came out on Mother's Day and said Black women are the backbone of Black society. So what he's doing is pushing this idea of you don't need men. He's pushing this idea of the women can do no wrong, no matter how they got in the situation. They can go to the government and look to the government for help and still be called independent women. And to go back to Joe's point, when he talked about in America, a Black man has a way greater opportunity than he had when he started out at his youth. And yet we aren't telling our children that, which should be the first thing you tell your children. You have a better opportunity now than I ever had. And guess who should mainly stop talking about you can't achieve and thrive in white supremacy? People like Tariq Nasheed, people like Al Sharpton, people like Jesse Jackson, because while they're telling you it's hard to get away, to attain wealth and success in this white supremacist country, guess what they've attained talking about that? Well, success. It's amazing.
But Jamie, I agree with everything that Jamie just said. So what do we have today? We've got young Black millennials, right, who are in the street marching, claiming they're racist white cops are hunting down and killing young Black men. They've been fed a narrative literally from mother's milk about they are victims. And so the anger that you see that can spark in somebody with a weak mentality, like this guy in Baton Rouge, or the killer in Dallas. So you've got thousands of young Black men that have that hatred for whites. Now, look at how that correlates. So the Klan today, the white supremacist organization today, are broken, bankrupt organizations. They try to hold demonstrations in various cities. They can't conjure up 25 people. The demonstrators are always bigger than they are. Mm-hmm. So then who is perpetuating this notion of victimhood? It's Black people doing that generation after generation. I've always argued, Black people are really serious. They've got to sit down and look at the narrative that they tell others in this country about themselves. And the narrative is always about suffering. Look at the films that get made about slavery, and it's like, really? We
look at the rap movie.
So the narrative needs to be rethought, reprogrammed, that offers a new, hopeful, more optimistic, and a truer rendition of who Black people are in America today. This ain't 1932. It's not 1860. It's another whole narrative about who are Black Americans and what is that story that they have to tell that isn't a negative story of that always somehow relates to the white man got to pay me, they owe me, I got to get payback. That's not going to work, and that's going to be a very destructive element moving forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I have maybe one or two questions. We're running out of time, but go ahead, Tommy.
I just wanted to point out, and Joe, it's funny, and you being a black man, have you noticed this? You have a lot of blacks talking about how they're struggling and how the government's keeping them down. And then they'll say this in their music, and in the same breath, they'll talk about how they got Jordans, gold chains, and they balling out of control. How can the two come from the same mouth?
Thank you, Tommy. Well, look, let's end with maybe some of these themes. I have to say, Shelby Steele, profound impact on me when I was reading him throughout my youth and my life, and his book, The Content of Our Character. And he brought up such profound themes in that book, and I recommend this book to everybody that's watching if you haven't read it. But he talks about integration shock. And, supposedly they wanted integration, and the society wanted integration. But Shelby Steele talks about once integration occurred, then accountability started, because you couldn't blame white racism anymore, right? And there was a discomfort with that. And he talks about this metaphor about being on a train, about a black man making it on a train, and you've got the other blacks running up to the train saying, come on, help me up, help me up. And Steele says, I don't like that picture, because I don't think that person that doesn't help them up is necessarily bad. I want to reframe the dialogue. I want to say, how can I help you find out and figure out how to get a ticket to get on the train yourself? Can we speak about that a little bit? I think that those two themes are very powerful and are central to what we're talking about. Joe?
Well, yeah, I mean, see, the story of people, obviously black people were brought here largely against their will. So we get that. We understand that story. And a long struggle was waged to allow them the same opportunity guaranteed under the Constitution. Other immigrant people came as well: the Irish, the Poles, the Jews, the Germans, later, Latino populations, and people from Southeast Asia, the Koreans and Vietnamese, and on and on. And all of those populations have found ways to utilize America and its opportunities to succeed. Blacks get really angry when you try to compare black progress to Vietnamese or Koreans or other immigrants, because they realize they don't match up very well. So I think that this notion of self-help that once was a major part of earlier sort of self-improvement, self-help efforts in Black America have been left by the wayside. Now the expectation is government's got to do it. So this notion of building yourself up, entrepreneurship, education. I remember when I was a kid, my father would drill into me, boy, get you a good education. Now it's like, well, people will say, well, that's the white man's education. So it's really twisted and turned into a pathological mess that now is like a ball of yarn we've got to unpack and figure how we get this population back on the right track.
Tommy?
That was very eloquent, and I agree with it 100%. There used to be a time, actually, where blacks did believe more in self-reliance. What happened is liberalism and the Great Society. When you decided that the black families no longer needed the black man, that all they needed was the government, because the government came in and substituted the man in the black community. And that was where you found a failure in the black homes. Blacks were actually doing kind of well under segregation because they had to do it. They couldn't look towards someone else. They had to build their own businesses. They had to make their own way. Now it's gotten so bad that blacks will see something like the Masters, see that even if the Masters didn't want blacks there, that they couldn't say, well, there's land all over the United States and we can build our own. You look at what the Jews did with the whole idea of wanting to rebuild back the temple and things. Well, blacks always like to harken back to a place called Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Well, I went back there and I was greatly disappointed. With all the millionaires in the United States, none of those blacks decided to put their businesses right back there and rebuild their great society, their great civilization in America. What does that tell you? It tells you that right now, black parents aren't teaching their kids the value of education, the value of getting a trade and trying to make your own business. They look at life as, let's hope that someone gives us a job. We don't have to be qualified. We want a quota. Well, black people like myself, we don't want to be a part of some quota. We want the best man or woman for the job to win. And you cannot have that be a pervasive thought in a community when the government becomes that community's father.
Thank you so much, Tommy. We just got a little bit of time left. Under a minute, please, each of you. Joe, if you were to describe in a few sentences the Black Lives Matter movement and describe who Obama is, what would you say?
Well, Obama can't escape who he really is. He's a leftist. So this notion to look at him, want to look at him and identify him as a moderate, the guy is in fact a leftist, and that's his basic instinct, which is why, and he's a black leftist, which means he always cheats toward the Black Lives Matter because it's empathy. His views are there with those folks. Black Lives Matter is an interesting group. It did something I didn't think anybody would ever be able to do in so-called black life, is push Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton out of the way. They really ran them out of this movement to be the leaders of these kind of organizations. So it's really interesting. They are a hateful, racist, violent organization. Like if we had more time, we could spend some time examining that. But the extremists are who are actually running that organization. The moderates have to find areas at the margin to exist in Black Lives Matter.
Joe, is the blood of the police officers who were assassinated recently on the hands of Black Lives Matter?
Oh, of course. It's just like ISIS inspires lone wolf killers all around the world to kill people indiscriminately. I would argue that the kinds of things, arguing that cops are like pigs in a blanket, frying like bacon, marchers walking on the street, and the chant is, what do we want? Black dead cops, when do we want it? Now. Well, those kind of anti-white and anti-cop rhetoric can have a profound effect on somebody if you've got an unstable mind and you're susceptible to that kind of rhetoric. That's often, we've seen that inspire people before. Certainly was the case in Dallas. May not have been exactly the case in Baton Rouge, but it certainly is and will continue to inspire people to shoot down cops.
Please, in just, under 10 seconds, is the blood of those officers also on Obama's hands?
Well, it's the blood is adjacent to his hands. Mm-hmm. I don't think Obama, because he's not a revolutionary kind of guy. He's a middle of the road leftist, guy who wants to show how racially authentic he is by giving a nod and a wink to the Black Lives Matter folks. Well, I'm really with you. So he clearly continues to encourage them. Now, does that mean he's got blood on his hands? I think anybody that is helping, aiding, giving moral support to Black Lives Matter has to accept their responsibility for that, though. Okay, Tommy, on Black Lives Matter and Obama?
I'm not going to say that Black Lives Matter, the blood is on their hands. Guess who the blood's on, whose hands the blood is on? George Soros, the major financial backer of this whole Black Lives Matter movement. What about Hillary Clinton, who legitimizes the Black Lives Matter movement by bringing them up in her campaigns, by refusing to talk about the things that they're doing wrong? What about the leftist media, the liberal media, the media who props them up as a bastion of black people should listen to them? The majority of black people in America, when they first started out, understood the process of saying Black Lives Matter. But the things that are happening now, most right-thinking black people do not are not behind this movement. But when you watch your television, when you watch CNN, when you watch CNBC and everyone else, guess what you see? Them telling you that blacks in unison are behind this movement, no matter what they do. So if you keep on pushing this narrative as blacks are behind this movement, no matter how far the person who's doing the terrorism goes, because honestly, that's what a terrorist does. A terrorist is someone who has even the people who are against it afraid to say something about it. They can do this terror against the police officers who black people call a whole lot in their communities to come and save them and rescue them. And rescue them from who? Is it other white people who are coming into black neighborhoods and selling dope and raping kids and shooting? No, it's other black people. So they're calling these same cops that they're saying pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. They're calling those same white people to come and give them good service. And I think that's ridiculous, but we're not blaming the major people who are doing it because blacks are not able to finance and put these things on CNN. They're not.
Thank you so much. We're out of time. Before we go, if people want to find you and they want to support you and they want to interact with you, where do they go? Joe Hicks?
J. Hicks at cai-la.org.
Okay, fantastic. Tommy, where do people find you?
They can find me on Twitter and Instagram at TJ Sotomayor. That's Sotomayor, or just find me on my website at TommySotomayor.com.
Gentlemen, thank you for being such noble, courageous truth tellers in our world today.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
a lot.
you. I have a feeling that round 2 should be coming up now because we have so much more to discuss. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining the Glazov Gang this evening. Remember, this is a fan-generated show. Please go to jamieglazov.com to support the show and subscribe to the YouTube channel of the Glazov Gang. We'll see you on our next edition. Good night.